Genesis is a book of beginnings. The name itself is derived from the Greek word genesis, meaning origin. It's a fitting name because it is a collection of stories about beginnings, the origin of creation, humanity, society, and the very foundations of Israelite religion and culture. Many of the stories contained in its pages are from the Bronze Age, approximately 3000 to 1200 BCE. Though the stories begin with creation, most of the book of Genesis follows the families of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, all of whom it is widely believed would have lived sometime during the Middle Bronze Age, approximately 2200 to 1500 BCE. So why is this important? It's important because of when the stories themselves were written down. Saul was not instituted as the first king of Israel until around 1020 BCE, and Jerusalem the capital until sometime around 1000 BCE. The first temple was built just a few decades later. And it is around this time that the book of Genesis, along with the rest of the Pentateuch, began to be compiled and the stories written down. The most popular theory of authorship of Genesis remains the documentary hypothesis, also known as the JEDP theory, which many of you are already familiar with. Here's a quick review for those of you who may be less familiar with it. Essentially, it is a theory that the Pentateuch was written and compiled over time by various writers. Each writer used different names for God, which first drew the attention of Jean Ostrach and later Julius Wellhausen, who is primarily credited with this hypothesis. The four groups of authors were Yahwists, mid-10th century BCE, Elohist, 9th century BCE, Deuteronomist, 7th century BCE, and Priestley, 6th or 5th century BCE. The theory has morphed over time and grown to include more authors, and scholars debate the dates for authorship, but these dates I found to be fairly standard within current academia. There are a couple of other interesting theories around the authorship of Genesis, but I want to focus on who began compiling Genesis and the cultural context of its earliest composition. Since this hypothesis remains the one with greatest general support, I will assume that Genesis was first compiled in the First Temple period in mid-10th century BCE. So who were the Yahwists? It's widely thought that they wrote anonymously in Judah during Solomon's reign. They traced Israel's history from creation through the patriarchs to their prepared entry into Canaan. Some hypothesize that these original writings may have served as a national epic for the Davidic kingdom. I suspect that they served as a foundation for the newly budding Israelite society and culture. Michael Coogan suggests that there are three recurring themes found within the Yahwist tradition: relationship between humans and soil, the separation between the divine and human, and the progressive human corruption. Coogan suggests that the Yahwists are unique in how the relationship between humanity and soil is portrayed. Adam is created from the dust of the ground. Humankind is cursed to work the land as punishment for Adam and Eve's sin. And Noah is described as a man of the soil in Genesis 9:20. If the Yahwists were writing at a time when Israel was establishing itself as a nation with a distinct culture and religion, then this theme of rooting themselves into the soil would further solidify Israel's identity as a people belonging to a place and a God. Coogan points to several examples for his second theme, the separation between the divine and humanity. Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden for eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God declaring the Nephilim's existence as wicked, for they are the children of human women and the sons of God, and the Tower of Babel. The divine separation elevates God to a position greater than the other gods worshipped in the ancient Near East, and establishes the temple as being a profoundly treasured place, just at a time when the first temple is being constructed. His third theme, the progressive human corruption, is felt most heavily through the story of the flood. Human sin has reached a crescendo, and all is erased save Noah and his family. There are other examples, of course, such as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The flawed nature of humanity demands a place of reconciliation, which, again, could point toward the newly constructed temple. Interesting to our course of study, the Yahwists name a majority of our female characters and spend more time with these characters within the Genesis narrative. According to the research I did based on a division of Genesis by E.A. Spicer, the Yahwists name Eve, Sarah, Hagar, Milcah, Rebecca, Reumah, Keturah, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, Dinah, Tamar, and Deborah. Of all the women in Genesis, only these women named by the Yahwists play significant roles within the narrative. The Yahwists also name 8 women, though they are ancillary characters, which I'll list here. In the Yahwist account of the Abrahamic covenant, Sarah is included, and in chapter 18 she is given her own scene with her own covenant. In 22, Rebecca has an encounter with God as she becomes pregnant with Jacob and Esau. The Lord speaks directly to her, a blessing and announcement of things to come. Lot's daughters, and not his sons-in-laws, are rescued with the family from Sodom. His daughters also receive more time in the narrative, though it is a strange story of incest. Also, women are included in the genealogy. In Genesis 22, Jacob's lineage begins to take shape with the inclusion of his mother and grandmother, Rebecca and Milcah. Nahor's concubine is also named Reumah. In the Yahwist account, women appear to be given more agency. Rebecca, for instance, is allowed the choice in her marriage. She's also the principal schemer in the plot to have Jacob steal Esau's blessing from Isaac. Rachel and Leah conspire to leave their father's estate, encouraging Jacob to leave. Rachel, much like her aunt Rebecca, also schemes and tricks her father with clever diversions. When Tamar is routinely cheated from her rights to have children, she takes matter into her own hands by tricking her father-in-law, making her a heroine throughout the Hebrew scriptures. The Yahwist inclusion of the female characters in their origin stories, I believe, reveal a greater sense of inclusion for both genders within the cultural makeup than we often give them credence for. Women were more than side characters or plot foils, but often became the heroines of the origin account, as especially seen within the story of Tamar. While it would be far too much to call them egalitarian, it is evident that women were valued within their worldview. Having women play such important roles within the pages of an origin story when the nation of Israel is coming into its own illustrates how, even in a strongly patriarchal culture, women play a greater spiritual role than our modern scholarship often acknowledges.